Chris
Here.
LeBrie.
Here.
Chris is on, right? Michael
Yes.
Yes.
and Maria is on, Weingarten. Here. And Bob Hamill. He's not, okay. So we would just need a replacement for Robert Spangler. So that
Just have Chris?
Chris LeBrie, yeah. So we need a motion for Chris.
So moved.
Okay,
Second? Second?
Yep.
Yep, all in favor? Opposed, none? Yep, so moved.
all right.
Hello? Hello? No.
Okay, so a motion to approve the minutes from last month's regular meeting?
Oh, you need the Zoom link? Okay, hold on, I'll send it to you.
So moved.
All right.
Thanks, Tom. George, second. Hey, Tom Stadler, need you go on mute?
Okay, let me find it and send it to you.
You're on with Neil,
All-
right? Yeah, that's what I
All in
thought.
favor? Hang on, guys. All in favor of the minutes? Yep. Opposed? None? Okay, so moved. Okay, Kevin, I'm sure there's a lot to update and discuss, so over to you for your update. Thank you.
Tom, could you start recording?
I am recording and Neil's on the way.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Kevin, you're on mute.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, so I have a few items I'll mention. First, on COVID, our health department continues to do a stellar job managing what is a pretty challenging situation, but fortunately, because of all our personal responsibility in town, we have very good results going on in town. We've had a handful of cases that have developed mainly from traveling. People either traveling from out of state, from hotspot states back to New Canaan, or visitors, or people from Stanford. We on Monday stood up a one-day test site because last week people were concerned about a number of parties that young people have been to. And we tested 173 residents and only found 2 positive cases under 23 years of age. And most all the cases are young people now. There's been some chatter about how we report, and I addressed that today with the email to our local representative, Lucy Dathan. You can't look at the results on the Connecticut Public Health website, Department of Public Health, because it's raw data, and only by investigating those reported cases and understanding what is behind them can you really get a picture for what's going on in New Canaan. So I think, again, we're in very good stead, and surprisingly so, keeping in mind the Waveney Care Center, which is the largest private employer with 500 employees, many of them part-time, has tested all their employees, all their patients, and only one employee reported case. So that's kind of the picture for where we stand with COVID. Town Hall reopened on July 6th to visitors, and we are trying, other towns are not opening their town halls at all, continuing to do it by appointment. And we're really discouraging people from coming into town hall unless it's really necessary for a necessary appointment, especially not to pay taxes. You can pay taxes by mail by dropping it off in a lockbox at the door, online, or we've arranged to have Bankwell accept cash payments so that there's really no need for people to come to town hall to pay their taxes. We also, I think you earlier alluded to the fact that you'd like to have public meetings. We would like, as most other towns around us are not opening up town hall to public meetings until September 9th, when the governor's current emergency order expires. You could have small public meetings, but we really don't want to do that unless we really have strong reason to. We are moving forward, as I reported last night, with the CHP project at the sewer plant. And we had a meeting yesterday with the advisory council, the advisory committee on buildings and infrastructure. And Not sure where we are with the CHP project because it's kind of got mixed up with boiler replacement, and we'll have more on that in the future. We had a very successful solar RFP for 4 schools actually, and no, actually 3 schools, West Sax and the high school, as well as 3 more town buildings and possibly also Waveney Care Center. And with bids as low as 3.9 cents per kilowatt hour, which is pretty attractive pricing. The schools will proceed with PPAs. They'll make their choices, and we have to decide on the town side whether we have any more appetite for buying equipment that amortizes over a few years versus doing PPAs, which we did not do before. And we'll bring that back perhaps for August or September.
Hey, Kevin?
Yeah.
With the solar, is there coordination going on with the schools? I know you guys were trying to figure that out. Where does that stand in terms
We try
of?
to coordinate. George was on the meeting yesterday. Coordination is a challenge. But we try to coordinate.
Is there, I mean, are they big enough projects on their own that there's necessarily?
Well, the whole idea here,
I
the whole
understand.
idea here was to present a portfolio of projects that would have been attractive to larger bidders. You know, the firm that we used for the initial town project was a relatively small player in Richfield, retired IBM guy, and the schools are much bigger projects, and but it makes sense to try to get most of the bidders. Were 6 qualified and two late bidders, but they all were invited to bid on a portfolio basis and or individually. So we were quite surprised at how attractive the offer, the price, and I think there's plenty there for the schools to choose from.
Yeah. I mean, there were, I think, if I remember correctly, Kevin, 5 companies that bid on the entire portfolio, town plus school.
Right.
I think the next steps after the meeting, if I remember correctly, are we're going to let the school do some drill down and due diligence on those companies in terms of their long-term survivability for the 20-year PPAs. And then the town, we hope, will be able to piggyback on the results of that research so that we can award collectively the contracts. At least that's, I think, where we are now.
Yeah, they're all qualified bidders. I mean, these are major players, and
So were the bids more attractive on the kilowatt hour basis when the whole portfolio was put together, when you get the bigger group looking at the schools and the town? I mean, I know this is.
well, they ranged. Again, the bottoms were under 4 cents a kilowatt hour. I think we did South School last summer at 4 cents. All the schools in Wilton were done at 2 cents. Keep in mind when you're paying 16 cents currently on average for a lot of these buildings. So they all produced very good savings. Some of the bidders were quite high. You know, somebody like Blackstone, who you'd think would be more competitive. You know, and Davis Hill. Again, these are financial partners. These are not the contractors. No. But these are people who want to simply put on their books a portfolio of income stream from Eversource, because Eversource pays them, and we pay a small fraction of what we would otherwise pay.
Okay, thanks.
So we had a hearing by Zoom their first Connecticut Siting Council hearing last Thursday evening. They did not come to New Canaan as they normally do for a site visit, and on the 183 Soundview Lane cell tower, and I thought that hearing went rather well. As I've alluded to before, we're working on another location for another cell tower currently, and I hope to have news out about that soon. And then, as Todd has alluded to, we have a couple conversations going on about selling some assets, and we hope to bring that to you soon. So that is about all I have. I'd be happy to take questions.
Any questions for Kevin? I've got one. It's maybe unfair, but I should have invited the board or to Dr. Lutzy to this meeting. I was just curious, do we have any new news on, or the status of school opening? Is, what's the latest coming from the state, and what's their timeline for making a decision? Do you know? And if you don't, it's fine. You didn't know.
Well, I think there's some others that perhaps are following the schools more than I do. Amy or who's Maria? I think they're planning on opening with attendance. So that actually there was a report yesterday by the Superintendent Association that most Connecticut districts are planning to open with physical attendance. So
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah,
direction.
okay.
But obviously, last Monday, the city of Norwalk had a positive case on the first day of their summer school, so they backed up and went to remote learning for summer school. We never even tried physical summer school. But the camps are a good indication of how people are operating. The camps were designed to be a training ground for school. And, there was one incident with the daycare at the YMCA, which is not a camp, but a daycare center. And there was one employee who tested positive, and they simply pulled that cohort of kids out, and there were no further ramifications from it. I think we just have to learn to live with this, with some limited risk, but I think that's the direction.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Any other questions for the first selectman? Amy, yeah.
Yeah, just, and you may not want to talk about this, but, asset sales, you want to give us some idea what you're thinking about? I mean, or just leave us hanging. I mean, I know we do have this yellow building hanging out in the corner, but.
Well, I have conversations going on about that. Again, we haven't, the fact that we temporarily are occupying that with the health department to spread people out doesn't mean we're not proceeding with that transaction. We've had conversations with well, you all know who it is, who made a bid, and we want them to move along. Obviously, COVID has slowed things down a bit, but so that's one among a couple or three. So, and Todd is well aware of them. So,
Yeah, a little too early, just because they're very, very, very preliminary conversations. But if they get warm, they'll be on our agenda in the fall for sure. I just put Judy, for the record, please. Both Bob Spangler and Neil Budnick have joined. I don't know if you saw that, but I just want to make sure that they join while we're doing the quick updates. Okay. Okay. If nothing else, then thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that. I'd like to move on to the next item on the agenda for the library bond resolution. I asked for this agenda item because I think it's important that this board, I think we need to ask and answer what this board needs for certainty prior to drafting and approving our own bond resolution. That's going to be in the neighborhood of $10 million approximately. And so I did want to take time tonight, get your input on the guidelines, make sure that we can draft them for our own purposes, but also to bring clarity to the library regarding what the town's going to need to move forward with a bond resolution. Could I ask someone to take notes on this and to have not just the minutes, but I'd like someone to volunteer to just keep track of the items that we want to make sure we have as criteria for the bond resolution. Anybody willing to? Chris Labrie. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And so, I've got ideas, but if I'd like to start with the board and get your input in terms of some of the criteria you'd like to make sure we've got certainty on before we proceed. Amy, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I circulated these thoughts around people after the last meeting. I think I sent my thoughts on like June 16th, and I wasn't going to compete with our own Tom Schulte in trying to do language. But one
This
thing
isn't for the MOU. This
Yeah.
isn't really for the MOU so much as it is for the bond resolution approval.
hey, Todd, could I make a few comments first?
Yeah,
You know,
sure. Well,
we-
Amy, do you want? Hang on, Kevin. Did you?
Yeah, I'm
were you
sorry.
clear on that, Amy? Or
I can wait. It's done that. It's fine.
okay.
Yeah, we sort of had a goal of bringing an MOU to the bodies by June. But as the COVID slowed the library and everyone down, then it became apparent, based upon the town council conversations, that they really don't want to proceed with a final MOU until they get way down the road to see what P&Z does. And P&Z now is not scheduled to take it up until October. We were also trying to orchestrate having a plan that could be approved by August or September so that we could fit it into a window to give an opportunity for referendum. We can't accomplish that now before November 3rd. So, and we can't just put it on the November 3rd ballot. There's no process for that to legally do that. Some people have suggested we put it to a vote of the town. But whenever you finally, and the town council, I shouldn't say
Right.
you, town council approves a bond resolution, it then becomes a referendable, and that would take a
That's
60-day
right.
period. So that's probably into early 2021 now.
Yep. No, I agree with all of that, and I think maybe number one on the list for Chris Labrie is we need an MOU. We need an approved MOU. That's certainly one of the things that we need for sure, and that's not done. So to your point, Kevin, I completely agree with you. Amy, go back to you. Did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, and I guess it speaks to the MOU, but just, you know, in the process. Now, first of all, I think this project's amazing, and I really hope we do go forward with it. And I'm, you know, I just think I do a shout out to all the people who've done so much work forever on it, and realizing not everyone's going to be pleased with everyone, but I do want to just say I think it's an incredible project. But in terms of the town's commitment to 10 million, which I you know, think in for a third, a little bit less than a third, I think that's a great return on investment for us. But I think in terms of the one thing in the MOU that really jumped out to me was how we would expend town money. And I feel firmly that we should commit to the 10 million, but I don't think any money should go out until we basically have a shovel ready project and you're about to break ground, because that way everything's buttoned up, planning and zoning, your contract, everything. And that, I guess I would put it, you know, in the library's team to kind of pay the soft costs up until that point. But I think that would really minimize any feelings of people being concerned that we're spending money before we know something's firm and done. So that to me is I think it's very important. I think we should commit to it with the understanding that once everything's buttoned up, we have a firm contract, they're ready to go, no questions in the cost, P&Z's done, then that's when I would feel comfortable with expending the actual 10 million commitment from the town in whatever way we want to at that point.
So what if I just heard you know, shovel ready and so forth? That would imply a few things, right? That would imply there's a timeline. So for Chris, that would imply there's a budget, a hard number. I mean, this board can't approve a bond resolution without knowing what the whole size of the program is, for obvious reasons, not the least of which is if there were some gap in funding because it was an unreasonable budget, you know, how would that get covered? Well, the town's out there for some number of millions of dollars. I think you just said P&Z approval, which I think everyone agrees with as well. And I think the last thing might be the annual operating expenses for the library. I think that's another piece of the puzzle before things are shovel ready. Are there other ideas, or do you guys agree with those? Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
So to me, it really comes down to, and I'm sorry I missed the last meeting, but so if I'm treading over worn ground, let me know. But you know, are we a lender, or are we an equity partner, right? So if we're an equity partner, you get into a partnership before financing occurs, and you put up on some pro rata basis pre-development monies to help fund costs prior to start of construction. If you're a lender, you do exactly as Amy just said. And this is a bond resolution, oh, by the way, it's not an equity commitment. And so it does seem to flow that if we're a subordinated lender, which is effectively what we are, to the property, you as a lender would go through your whole level of due diligence, and you don't commit to fund your loan until such time that all of your criteria for closing has been met, and you just cited, you know, some of the key ones that you'd have to have in place. So obviously having a total development cost with a guaranteed max price contract, understanding that you've got control of the site, you've got architect drawings and specs and approvals from all of the required bodies, or what's required in any funding for any project. So that's how I assumed we would approach this. Now they should know that we have a commitment, because, you know, they got to have all of their funding in place before they, you know, it's a puzzle, and they got to put all the pieces together. And you know, I think we've probably accomplished that already, and maybe that's what the MOU does. But certainly from a bond authority, you would do that right as you start to approach the actual date by which they need those funds.
But
Yeah,
Bob,
no, I think.
okay. Well, one thing that I think is kind of important in doing it, whether you want to call it an equity partner or a lender, because it's a grant. It's not lending, though we do have, you know, a lien on the property. But we're kind of a contributor to this. But I think the reason I think just beyond how you want to phrase this, why it's important, is because then I think from a taxpayer's perspective, no one's anxious that we're over our skis and we're committing more than what the understanding was. Because if we get to a point where it's the final cost ready to go, they got the contract in place, and they firm bids, they know all in it's going to cost them whatever 30 something million, and we're in for 10 and everything's firm. I think just from a taxpayer's perspective, I think that gives a lot of comfort that all of a sudden we're not going to be on the hook for more. Not that I think they're expecting us to. I mean, just in terms of, I think it's important from the public's perspective that, it's all ready to go, and then it's a real alive project, and then we're there.
Other thoughts or input?
Todd, I'd make a suggestion. There's no reason why we can't begin to operate. For example, we expect to have representation on the building committee. That perhaps should start now and not wait till we get through the process. Because the building committee has been in operation for 6 months, or probably 9 months. It'd probably be good for our representatives to catch up on that process. The other thing is the waiting for the planning and zoning process to start in October. They normally won't make decisions until the end of their process. So something like traffic and parking, which is one of the issues outstanding for P&Z, we perhaps need to accelerate up to the front to make some evaluations, and we've begun to do that after conversations with John Goodwin, so the town knows where that issue is coming out before the planning and zoning process begins. So, I think we ought to think just in terms of working more closely with the library as a partner now, because we need to stay current as to where they're going.
Yep. Okay.
Just a quick question. Are we going to ask for the full $35 million to be in place before we fund our 10 million? Not just commitments, but that the other 25 million is in an escrow account or whatever else? Or are we going to not ask for that?
Well, I think that's on the list, Michael. I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I'm sure everybody has an opinion.
Well, Chris
but I think
Chris.
Go ahead, Chris and Neil. Yep.
So the way the library raises the money is on long-term commitments. So these commitments get paid in over 3 to 5 years, depending on what they've worked out with individual donors. So it would be unreasonable to expect them to have all 25 or whatever millions they expect to raise in the bank prior to disbursement of the town's money. However, they should be able to show us enough money in the bank to match the money that the town will be advancing, and they should be able to show us pledges for the remaining monies to be contributed over a period of time. And if there is a gap, then they should be able to show us a plan for bridging that gap. So, for example, we get to the point where there's $30 million in play, 10 million from the town, 20 million from the library, of which 10 has been paid in to their actual accounts. And this is an example. These are not real numbers. We would expect them to show us the 10 million or how they have spent it, because they will have spent some of it on soft costs. So we give them credit for that. We would expect them to show us an audited pledges that we can point to and say, yes, okay, these are valid legal pledges that will be paid in over 2 to 3 years or 5 years, whatever it is. And then show us, okay, there's a $5 million gap, for example. How are you going to bridge that gap? What are your plans? How do you expect that to work?
Yeah.
Absent that, I mean, with all that, you could proceed, I think.
Chris, you have to mention another thing: the bank facility, which is now committed.
Well, yes, the bank has committed to lend the library up to $15 million. There is some concern. I personally think that's too big a number. I'd like to see it more like 10, because I don't think they need more than 10. But that's something to be worked out in the MOU.
So I think,
George.
I think there's a couple of things we need, and then a couple of things probably we don't need. We certainly are going to need a construction schedule. And attached to the construction schedule is going to be what jobs, what skill sets, what subcontractors are doing what, when. And accompanying that is the related sources and uses statement of, okay, this is how much money we're going to spend, and this is where it's going to come from. I personally don't have a problem with the library getting a $15 million rather than a $10 million commitment from their financing bank, because they're only going to use that money to the extent that they need that money. And it would be nice to have a little bit of a cushion in case things take longer than we think, or some of the original cost construction estimates don't line up with actual expenditures. But other than that, the onus on getting P&Z approval, traffic study approval, all those kinds of things, that onus is on the library. And once they've got all of that, then they can come to the town, just like they can come to the bank and say, okay, now we're ready to start drawing down on the fund commitments.
You know, it's Tom. I'd just say, as a practical matter, we don't really have to reinvent this wheel, because the conditions to the financing will have all of this stuff baked. I think,
Right.
you know, Michael and Todd, you've raised a good point, which is on some level, we need to make sure that it is guaranteed maximum price contract, right? It's got to be something that says, you know, the general contractors put that building on this piece of property by this date for that price, right? And then there'll be all of the schedule subcontractors that George was referring to, and all that stuff will get baked. The conditions proceeding to drawing down any third-party financing like a bank is going to have all the zoning, it's going to comply with laws, it's going to do all that. So I think Kevin raises a very good point. We're going to have to front load some of this stuff into the P&Z process to make sure that it all kind of comes together happily at the end of this calendar year or beginning of the next calendar year. But it seems to me that all of that stuff will be baked. Clearly, it's not provided for in any detailed way in the MOU, but it will ultimately follow the way the third-party financing is going to unfold, it seems to me.
I
So
should also mention,
a quick question. Who is, to Chris's answer, in case some of the pledges don't come in, let's say someone pledged some money and it doesn't come in because they move out of town or whatever, are we backstopping the pledge? So let's say they have pledges for 25, but only 20 comes in. So they're 5 million short. Who's backstopping the additional 5 million? Because you're not going to not complete the library, right? We got to complete it. So are we backstopping any pledges that don't come in?
No, there's no discussion of that. Pledges are legal commitments, so presumably the library could continue to pursue them, even if there was
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought,
somebody
Chris,
reneged on it.
I would have thought the answer is probably, and again, I don't know how this is all going to go, but, you know, from the town's perspective, do we want to put our money up, and do we want our obligation to be triggered? And then are we taking donor risk, or are we taking third-party bank lender risk?
Right. That's the question, Tom.
And I would have thought that to the extent that they don't have actual funds from donors on hand to bridge the gap between, you know, total project cost and the town's piece, that would all be covered by the bank commitment.
Exactly.
Even if the donor money comes in, they would never need to draw.
I think-
How deep do you want to get involved in this in terms of, do you really want to dictate the bank liquidity line be going from 15 to 10? Should we be opining on that, or just accept it in the scope of the project? It either acceptable or not, but we can drill down here. You know, there's a lot of things in the project not complete yet. And how far do we want to drill down? Do we want to come in and say 15 million is too much? 10,
We don't have to.
Yeah, I don't think we
Sorry,
have to.
so all we have to say is 10 is 10.
10 is 10.
And that's it.
Exactly.
We don't have to do anything else.
That's
So
it.
if they have a cost overrun, frankly, it's going to be borne by the construction lender. That's how these,
Yep.
you know, I do this for a living. That's how these deals work. And so the construction lender will bear that cost, bear that risk. So right now they would have the pledges come through and pare down that construction loan. So
Right.
it will either be a perm of 0 or it could be a perm of 5, right?
Right.
So they might have a permanent loan of $5 million.
What
You know,
about
they'll
the
have to work out the terms with the lender or whatever, but that's what fills that gap.
Yeah, but one of the things you have to ask yourself is, what's the source of repayment for library?
right? It's
I
the
think
town.
it would be their fundraising. I mean, that happens sometimes, you know. You do
Yeah, but
fundraising,
remember, from the
and then
banks,
it extends longer, you know, your fundraising.
yeah, so the gap at the end of the day becomes the bank loan.
Right.
Right, and then
Uh,
they
Yeah,
have.
but
but
the
the bank-
bank has wouldn't the bank have a first lien on a $35 million asset?
Yes, the bank
Yeah,
will have a mortgage.
Yeah.
And the question is, if that mortgage is ever called, then what happens?
No, there's an implied moral obligation to the town.
Yes,
Absolutely.
there is. And,
Right.
and from the bank's perspective, they probably are thinking, well, if worse comes to worse, we'll go to the town.
Yeah.
The town should protect itself in the event that that happens. And there's a number of things that we should do. One of them has to do, I think, with the zoning, to make sure that that piece of property is zoned in such a way that it can really only be used for municipal purposes.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Chris.
So it also should be control of the board.
Whose board?
What board?
The library board, to the extent that there was ever a default and it wasn't cured and you'd have an appropriate cure period and you'd make it comfortable such that it would be a worst case scenario. But if it ever got to that, the town should be able to step in and control the board.
Here's, Chris, you might mention a couple of things. One is that the libraries told us they already have $8 million in-house.
Yeah.
Secondly, their bank called us a couple weeks ago and said they're committed, and they encouraged the town to proceed.
Yeah.
So there's pieces here that are falling into place. And
Should-
certainly, you might explain the pari passu. I mean, they're already at $8 million. They're pledges that are due by the end of the year and stuff. By the time we fund, they're going to be at their pari passu mark.
So let's look, what's the worst that could happen? Say the town's $10 million commitment, which absolutely I agree, has to be capped. That's it. That's all you get. And the fundraising for the library falls short, or costs to complete the new library exceed their current estimates. And at the end of all of it, say there's still $5 million outstanding on the construction loan. What will happen is the construction lender is just going to roll that into a permanent. And then that permanent is going to get retired by subsequent fundraising by the library from the people in the town. No local bank
It's gonna take over the
going
library.
is going to say, okay, let's foreclose on a library. They're not going to do that.
I agree.
So I think the risks to the town are de minimis.
Well, who's going to pay? Who's going to pay that difference? The money that can't be covered.
That's what I just said. Once they roll it into
Well,
a permanent, say it's
future
a
pledges, Neil.
10-year, they pay it off from subsequent fundraising.
Let's say we're past the pledges, though. We got the first comp in from the high rollers, and now we've got some pledges, but then we don't. They don't realize themselves.
Yes.
And we draw down our $15 million bank line to cover on that.
So the other worst
Well-
scenario is they put debt service in their operating.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Like
Well, that's
the
why the operating expense is important to understand as an assumption. Look, I think we got to be realistic. They can't, doing what we're talking about here, 10 is 10, and they're going to have a pretty good handle on what's actually going to come in and design and build an asset that meets the budget, not build what they want and hope the money comes in. I'm not
Again, we're not gonna,
micromanaging their project, but
we're gonna agree to the grant money, but only at such time that everything's firm. I mean, you have a DMAC
right.
fixed price contract. And so, yeah, okay, you could have risks and it's not going to show up, but it's kind of like running a campaign and people have to retire their debts over 20 years. You know, they'll have to, over time, like George said, you know, fundraise for it. Or worst case,
Yeah.
Bob said, you know, the interest expense on 5 million at like 2% would be an expense that they'd have to carry. I mean, I just don't think it's that huge a risk.
It's
Yeah.
sort of like the YMCA. They had a goal of 18 million. They only got 12 and they borrowed the rest and they went forward. So they value engineered some things out of the project.
Right. And then
Yeah, that's
because
it.
I'm on that board, we've been paying down that loan. So we're down to, like, we've already spent paid down $3 million off that loan. Because every time we get, you know, you all hopefully you give to the Y. When you give to the Y on an annual basis, a lot of that goes to pay down that debt.
It's a little different here, having 70% of their money coming, the regular operating money, coming from our budget already. You know, it's really kind of like a balloon. If you push one side and the other side comes up, we're paying either way. So we better be comfortable with this project, which is not, it's not perfectly defined right now.
But it will be. But it will be, because you cannot get construction documents. You cannot get a bid. You cannot get anything without all that in place. So it will be.
Right.
Well,
It'll
but
be tight.
that's what Todd once said at this meeting, which is a good
Exactly.
conversation, which is to say, I think we're all in, nobody's going to say, let's write them a check without knowing what we're paying for. So we got to
Right,
know all
that's
of
right.
all the particulars before we do that.
Well, Chris, I'm sure your list is about 22 items long now, but
Yeah.
look, this was literally what I wanted to get out of this conversation, and that was rapid fire feedback. Look, from the town's perspective, we will have the guidelines, we'll have governance and safeguards in place before we move a resolution forward, for sure. And look, you know, from the library's point of view, they should know two things. One, you know, we have money in our long-term capital plan for the library, and two, this board has voiced support for this project. I didn't invent this phrase, but someone came up with it and said, are you telling me that for $10 million, we can have a $30 million asset and we can borrow the money at 2%? Where do I sign up? That's a no-brainer from that. But having said that, we need all this ironed out, set up, and understood in detail, obviously, before we move forward. Other
Yeah, we
input or other ideas?
Yeah,
Go
we,
ahead.
we just need to make sure that the information that we get has great specificity and really goes into details and you know, so we understand even items like the cost of demolition. So we see where all those components
Good one.
are.
Good one.
Okay.
And resolution with the Historical Society. Judy, did you have a question? Or you're on mute, Judy.
Judy, okay.
Why would we not also be an equity partner? We all understand how you bond, how you do this in the end, but why would we not commit something now so that we don't handicap their efforts to raise money and their donors and their fundraising? It just seems like long to, you know, push this out for every dot, and we will get this MOU right, no doubt. I mean, where everybody's working on it, everybody's got great ideas. But if we're an equity partner, it reverts to the town anyway. One is the municipality property, and two as a stakeholder. So I'm not sure why we come in at the last moment. It seems like we could
Answer
do both.
that. So Judy, I think we do it because we don't need to. We're a AAA rated town with a
I understand.
reputable board and strong structure and governance and hopefully, you know, folks who back up what we say we're going to do. So we get them to where they need to be without us having to take more risk by having to put out money in pre-development because of the fact that they've, you know, this is being taped, right? So that they're going to have there's conversations, there's an MOU we're going to have under contract, our commitment to support the library at a point in time when they're ready for that support. But for us to come in early and take more risk doesn't seem, I don't think we need to. And the fact that they've done so incredibly well on pledges says that we don't have to.
Judy, I also think it caps our exposure for people who are concerned about that.
Oh, I totally.
If you come in early, then, you know, but this way you're like, okay, you guys are doing great. We'll be there for 10 when you're ready to go in the ground.
Are we going to have public hearings on this between now and P&Z or after P&Z? Because we've heard from both sides on the preservation. We really haven't heard too much from the community on the debt.
If you bring a bond resolution by, say, October,
Yeah, but that makes it referendable, not prior.
no, not until the town council approves a bond resolution. You can recommend it, but there'll be right? So, and there'll be a town council public hearing on the bond resolution. So there's plenty of opportunity down the road for public input.
Well, we
And
used
the
to have our own.
and the opportunity for a referendum. I mean, you know,
Oh, yeah, well, we all get that, yeah. Well, we've had our own public hearings before, Kevin, in the Board of Finance, several times, actually. So that would be
Well,
appropriate.
something to consider. You know, Judy, it's something to consider. Let's draft this set of guidelines and areas of clarity that we're looking for. Let's see where we are. It's a good question.
Yeah, just
Other
brief,
input?
I could just,
Go ahead, Tom.
so, Chris Labrie or Kevin, could you just go over again the date that they're now contemplating going to P&Z? That's more like a September, October date?
October.
October?
That's what they've told John Goodwin.
Yeah, because
This-
what they have to do, Tom, at this point is at the beginning of the in June, I think they committed to the board, the library board committed to start the soft cost clock running, which means that they went to the Centerbrook architects and they told them, we need for you to produce detailed plans and specs that we can present to our Planning and Zoning Commission. And I'm not sure the exact timing that Centerbrook gave them back, but I think it's around the beginning of September. So
Okay.
by the time they have analyzed that and teed up their meetings with P&Z, it's in October. And that's how we get to the October date.
Yeah, I was just trying to line up the issues like dominoes and just trying to think about the fact, when you go to P&Z, you have to have fully baked what your ask is, which
Yeah.
means the whole concept of the project has to be kind of done and dusted and ready to go, so you know what the ask is. Because if you keep kind of changing around the edges, you obviously you don't want to have to go back to P&Z. So I was just trying to get.
Yeah, and there's several big unknowns. I mean, parking is one of them that
Right.
P&Z will have to opine on.
Oh, we've also tried to bring that issue forward and try to get it resolved before it has to go to P&Z. So
Right, perfect.
And there'll
Yeah,
be
just
new-
on that. Go ahead, Neil.
there'll be new subjects too. As P&Z looks at it, they have a history of coming up with some other things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
And the process coming back, people do come back. And, that takes more time. By the time we give this money, I wouldn't be surprised if it was next year in terms
well,
of.
their schedule right now is having a shovel in the ground next May. So I think that schedule is doable.
Yeah, but their cash flows show the first dollar is required in January. That was if you look at Butman numbers.
Yep.
Yeah, but that can be tweaked and
Well, anything can be tweaked. The point is just leaning
no,
towards.
but there's plenty of money. They have enough already in the till to proceed until next May, I think.
Yeah, they have 16 million in pledges, 8 million paid in cash already. So
Yeah.
they got a lot of cash on hand.
So they can operate until May, I think.
And a committed bank line already. So they don't have
Yeah,
they don't have cash flow issues.
All they need is a completed project structure.
Yeah,
Exactly. Well, look,
we need a final.
Go ahead, Judy.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Judy, go ahead.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Look, I would just say this, though, that we wouldn't want to have a town hearing until we had a lot more facts on the table. But at some point, we would certainly want to we could have that conversation. But there are too many open questions at this point to have a hearing on what, right? So we've got to get some of those things nailed down before we would do a town hearing.
Yeah.
In any event. Okay. Chris or Kevin, any last comments, or Amy, anybody? Bob? Michael?
Yeah. It's a cool project,
All right.
though.
Great discussion. Yep. Thanks, Amy. Great discussion. Great input, everybody. Appreciate that. This will continue on. Okay, thanks. Let's move on to Linda and the financial update in terms of your estimate in terms of how the year ended and how we're starting up the next new year.
Sure. I'll do them in reverse order. I'll start with how we're doing in the year, and then I'll get into the financials that you have. So far, we're 14 days into the year. In terms of the tax deferral, we had about 50 taxpayers, tax entities defer out of almost 7,200 or so. So that was much less than what we had projected initially in terms of those that would defer. What we've actually collected, so I'm comparing last year and this year, just looking at the first 14 days. So last year we had collected about 9.9 million by the 14th day of the month through Lockbox. This year we have so far collected 8.3 million Lockbox. This is a combination of actual payments to the Lockbox, but including the box that we have outside of Town Hall. Additionally, oh no, so those are lock boxes. In-house are payments that are made into town hall. Last year we were at 6.2 million. This year we're at 5.4 million. And so if you look at the trending, we're trending pretty consistent with where we were last year. Last year, this time, we had collected about 3.9 million in online tax payments. This year, we have collected 4.5 million in online tax payments. So that's a spike of almost 1.5, and that is a direct relation to, to COVID and people moving towards online payments versus walking into town hall. So if you add all of those up, and these don't include escrow payments. We typically don't get escrow payments until about the 20th or so. So these are just cash and checks that we receive, and we anticipate getting escrow payments by the 20th and the 25th or so, because we get it through multiple companies. So far, last year we collected 19.1 million through those 3 forms. This year we're at 18.3 million. And therefore, in terms of projections, I think we're looking very good, in terms of collections. And as I mentioned before, our burn rate is about 12.5 to 13 million if we don't make any burn adjustments, and therefore we're well covered this year just from a cash flow perspective without even touching the fund balance. So that's just an update from last year. One thing we also did this year is we've opened an account with Bankwell for cash payments to discourage folks coming to City Hall. As of last week, we had about 15 or so taxpayers walk into Bankwell and make their cash payments for a total collection of about $30,000. So that was diverted from Town Hall to Bankwell. So that's where we are this year. So I think we're consistent. Actually, we're doing better than what I had initially projected with the conservative assumptions of tax collections.
Very good. Okay, thanks for that. Any questions on that before we go to the wrap up of 1920? Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here, and you have this in the packet that I emailed you. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So typically this, the month of June is longer to close than most months, and therefore we're still making payments, FY20 payments that are still coming in. Payroll we do on an accrual basis, and therefore the last payroll covered the town employees through the 28th. So this next payroll that comes up, there are 2 days of FY20 in that payroll. So those are some additional expenses that will hit, but they're baked into the projections. As far as revenues, we typically, by this time, we've pretty much collected 100%. So in my projections, you'll notice that the year-to-date matches the projection. We may have a couple of stragglers payments come in there, but for the most part, we're typically at 100% of collections by this time of year, and therefore I included that as far as my projections. So I'll start with the first page that you have in front of you, which is looking at the expenses. So you'll see that our total budget initially was 150.9 million. Year to date, we have 145.7. And as I mentioned, there are a couple of additional expenses that are yet to come. And so we're projecting right now at ending the year on around $148.5 million. And you can see here that we would have underspent year to date compared to revised about 2.4. So we're coming in $2.4 million under budget on the expense side. This also includes the additional funding that we did early on for the town health insurance, so that's already baked in. This also includes, we've incurred about $279,000 in COVID expenses, and therefore we were able to cover those expenses, obviously, by the underspend in the other accounts. So you'll see in some of the transfers that follow in the next agenda item is basically just sweeping underspent accounts to compensate for the COVID accounts. We anticipate getting reimbursed for all of our COVID expenses, and though that reimbursement is not reflected in the revenues, and therefore what we'll see at the end in terms of the relationship, revenues, expenditures, and what we're doing to the fund balance, that does not include any COVID revenues that will get reimbursed, which will be booked in FY20. Additionally, you'll see that for the Board of Ed, right now, I have a projection of them coming under 1.6. It's actually 2 million, but you recall we did 400,000 into the non-lapsing fund, and so that drops it to 1.6. But in my discussions with Dr. Keating, they're actually anticipating coming in slightly more. So my assumptions are a bit more conservative, and so we may be looking at savings, at least on the Board of Ed side, in excess of the 1.6 net that I'm projecting here. But for now, I've left the 1.6. We'll see. We'll know for sure by the end of mid-August is when they're done making all of their payments, including summer payments for teachers. So that's where we're looking at on the expense side. And so, the next page.
Just to close that out.
Sure.
Just to make sure I understand. So we got 2.5 million from your projection spending under budget. And then if we
Correct.
come in at that 148.5, we would be we would have spent $1 million less than last year, 2018, 2019, right? The prior year.
We would have spent
we come in at 148.5. We went
last year, yes, because last year we were at
the
149.5.
2018-19. Yeah, so we're 149. So it would be $1 million less than last year and $2.5 million better than budget. Good. Okay. All right. Thank you. It may be better. Okay.
Yes. And then on the revenue side, similar discussions we've had in terms of tax collections. They're coming in, as I said, I've projected everything at 100%. We may have a couple of 10, 20,000 or so come in between now and when we actually close the books. But total revenues, we're coming in at 800, about 800 over revenues, a function of the collection rate that we budget, but then also taking into account making up for some of the losses in the other areas. We talked about building permits. Conveyance fees is actually a good news story here. You'll see I'm going to highlight it here, that year to date, we're at 1.1. You recall initially when we started looking at this a couple of months ago, we were thinking it would be under $1 million and as low as 900,000, but it really picked up this spring. And therefore, all in all, we're looking at coming in again, revenues over budget. So in terms of fund balance, impact on the fund balance is this number here, revenues over expenditures. So right now, we're projecting actually adding to the fund balance by a little over 300,000, not including what's going to happen with the Board of Ed. And so if the Board of Ed has an even more positive experience in terms of their expenditures, this number could go up and we could potentially add more to the fund balance at the end of the year. So that's kind of where we are. I think we're closing out the year strong, given all the things that have happened since February, year to date. And I'll continue to provide you updates as we go through and as we close out the year. And we're going to continue to look at those tax collections, especially by the end of the month, once we get those payments from escrows, because what I've reported does not include any of the escrow payments yet. I'd be happy to answer any questions on this. You do have the detailed line item information in the pages that follow. I don't know if it's necessary to go through those. I wanted to provide you a high-level summary.
Hey, Linda,
and feel free to look at those.
Linda, I just have one quick question just to clarify. So right now, fund balance is projected to be around 34.4 million, right, at the end of June, right? The 34.4, is that about right? 34.3?
Yes.
So, which is great news. So if we do actually take 4.5 million out for next year's budget, which is what we had approved, you could see at the end of next June, the amount being around $30 million. It's not 26. I just want to make sure. I know how you do the budgeting, so you show it 26.
Oh, right.
But really, at the end of next June, just so everyone is clear, if the projections are right and we take 4.5 million out of the budget, we will be at the end of June 2021 around 30 million, not 26. So we will have a really good, healthy general fund. Is that correct, Linda? Am I reading that right?
That is correct. That is correct.
I just want everyone to see it so they don't get confused with the 26 million.
Right. The 26 is budget. You're correct.
But the actual will be around 30. So that's great. I just want to say that's great news. That is really, really good news, given that we have challenges that might come up next year, that we have a really strong general fund.
Yep. Nope. 100%.
Great.
Great job. Very good. No, and to this group too, and everybody, all the town departments and everybody else, you know, to come in under budget again, and a nice positive surprise on the revenues net is a very good way to wrap up that year. And to Michael's point, puts us on even stronger footing going into this year. Very good. Okay.
Great.
Anybody else have questions for Linda? Any other areas?
Nope.
Everybody's good? Okay. I can't see your hands with the
let me stop
sharing. So
here.
I don't know if anybody has any questions. Let's give it a second. Everybody's good? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Let's do the computer lease resolution.
Okay. And this is an annual resolution that you go through. The budget was already approved when we approved the budget this year, and so we're just bringing the resolution to you for approval for the Board of Ed leases. We actually did go out for bids, and we opened the bids, I believe it was last Friday, myself, Tom, and Joanne. We had a total of 7 responses to the bids. The lowest, they range from a percent to 4.7%, but the lowest was TD Equipment Finance that came in at 1%. And this is an entity that we've done, they have, I think it was a 2016 lease that they already have with us. But these are really good rates, and so we're excited. And so once this is approved, it'll go to the town council, and then it has the 7-day period, and then we will take it to the Board of Selectmen to award the bid, so we can move forward with the Board of Ed leases.
Okay, Judy, I think we need you to read the resolution, at least this first paragraph here in the agenda.
Judy, you're on mute.
And keep going down. To consider and act upon and recommend to town council the following resolution entitled Resolution Authorizing the Execution of a Lease Purchase Agreement to Acquire Computer Equipment for the Board of Education. You want me, resolution?
Okay, motion?
You want me to do that? All right.
I think we're good.
I'll
I think we're good. A motion, George, second. Amy, yep, Amy second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? Okay, thank you, everybody. So moved. Okay, Linda, you got the last 2 as well. Line item transfers.
Sure. We don't have anything for number 7 for approval of transfers. I'll bring those to you once we close out the year. Probably if you meet next in August or September, we'll have the approval. But the ones I do have are just for review. Again, this speaks to the what I said earlier, when we're sweeping out accounts just to even things out. It does not change the total budget. It's just reappropriating money between various accounts. And so you have those individual lists in front of you, but these are just for your review. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have on anything.
Anybody?
No.
No.
George? Nothing? Okay. Okay. That's the end of our agenda. So on an August meeting, right now, we're going to keep the meeting on the agenda just in case something comes up. Obviously, it will be a Zoom call, which makes it easier in August if people are traveling. But we'll make a decision in a couple of weeks. I'll talk with the First Selectman and with Tiger and with Board of Ed and the administration, just to see if there's anything pressing for us as we go into August before school starts or anything else. So so please keep the date on the August on your calendars, and we'll get back in a couple of weeks. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Anybody have? Kevin, you have anything? You're on mute.
You have the line item transfers.
I think you said there weren't any.
Right?
No, I said there were line item transfers for review that are on the list, but there are none for approval.
Not for approval.
Oh,
Oh, so
Yeah.
You reviewed them, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And no one had any questions. Okay. All right. A motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Who gets their hand up first? Bob Spangler. Second. Michael Chen. Okay. All in favor? All right. Opposed? None. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.